Okay, we're at Buttermilk Falls today, which is literally maybe 4 miles from my home. And this is another part of the series for understanding exposure. We're going to deal with, again, shutter speed and how slowing down the shutter really impacts the look of your images. And now, it doesn't work on everything, but it will work on many situations. You could change the look even of a sports photograph by changing it. But today, again, we're going to deal with the shutter speed. And this is also part of understanding that there are beautiful places literally minutes from your home. As I stated, it's about 4 miles from my home. It takes me a couple minutes to get here. And it is one of those places that I just literally love to go to and visit. It's got a little bit of a noise because of the water just rushing behind me going down to the falls with a photograph on another day. But it's just beautiful, beautiful place to go. In today's lesson, we're going to discuss the second part of understanding exposure. Exposure, you have a three-part triangle, and it has aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So today we're going to look at how the changing the shutter speed will impact the look of your image. In the lesson on aperture, we showed how changing your aperture will change the look of your image, changing the depth of field as you open and close the lens or the iris. It lets in more or less light. And you could have a perfectly exposed image, but the image might not be what you want it to say. And the same thing with shutter speed. You could have a perfectly exposed image, but it might not be what you want it to say. So in this example that you see up on the screen, I shot this with my Olympus EM1 Mark II. It's on a tripod, and it is in an area close to my home, as the previous note stated. I shot this at ISO 64 at f22 in 60 seconds. The reason I used f22 is I just wanted to get as slow as shutter speed as I could. I used the variable neutral density filter on there to cut even more light out, but this is what we have. So you'll see that when you slow down the shutter, it changes the look of the water, almost creating a look of ice. Here's another image from the same place with the same settings, except for the focal length, and I was in a different location. But again, 60 seconds, and it makes it look like it was iced over. Even though it is very cold there, and there was some snow on the ground, the water was not ice. In this example, same scene, basically from here, it's the same scenes that you have, just backed off a little bit. And this is at 1/200th of a second. So according to the meter, I needed to change it to ISO 800 to get 1/200th of a second. Change the aperture to f4. So basically the exposure meter stated that this was a perfectly exposed image. And you'll notice that it's just an okay image. It's just boring. You see the water, that was water, nothing extravagant. And there's nothing wrong with it if this is what you want. But again, this isn't the image that I wanted. But it shows you we open and close the shutter very quick. It was 1/200th of a second. In this example, a little different location down the street, and it's at 160th of a second at 4 ISO 200. Again, the exposure meter stated that this was perfectly exposed. Again, nothing fun about it, but I wanted to show you that the faster the shutter speed, 1/200th, 1/60th, 160th of a second, that will freeze. For the most part, it didn't completely freeze, but it will freeze for the most part the action. In this image, I took this earlier in the winter, and it was one of my granddaughters, and she was coming down on a sled. We had a little bit of snow. It wasn't a whole lot of snow, and this was shot at 1/1000th of a second, ISO 200 f2.8. And you'll notice how the snow is sort of froze in the sky, no pun intended. It just froze out there, and it kind of it completely froze the action. She was coming at me, and it literally froze her. So again, if I would have used 60 seconds to photograph this scene, she would have been all blurred out, maybe even turned into a ghost in the image. In this image here, it's 60 seconds, 1/200th of a second. You'll see here 1/660th of a second, and this one at 1/1000th of a second, freezing the action completely. Now, in these two examples are very fast-moving vehicles. It was at a car show that I attended earlier in the summer, and you'll notice in the image on the right-hand side, it's at f4 1/5000th of a second at ISO 400, and it froze the car, although it was moving fairly quick. I'm not sure exactly the speed it was traveling at, but it moved and it froze it in its position because it was going at 1/5000th of a second. In this image, it's at 1/1000th of a second. Again, the cars were coming at me, so it makes it a little bit easier not only to focus, but it froze them in space or time. In this one is another example of a slow shutter speed, and it's at 1.3 seconds. There's some fireworks I photographed earlier in the summer, and at 1.3 seconds, it left the shutter open and the light just splattered all over, making it look really nice. And these three examples are slow shutter, and the shutter helps bring in the ambient light. And we will discuss bringing in ambient light with slow shutter at a future time, but I just want to show you that even the slow shutter can be used if the subject isn't moving or barely moving. This one here is at 1/80th of a second. Although not considered slow, it is slower than what I like to do for some portraits. This one's at 1/50th of a second, bringing in the ambient light around the subject, and this one here at 1/40th of a second, bringing in more ambient light also. This one is very similar to the other images that we looked at. It's at 20 seconds, f11, 20 seconds, an ice-like effect on the water. And this one here, very similar, but not the same. This one's at 4 seconds. So you'll see that this was literally the same place, just on the opposite side of the pier. The sun changed a little bit, went from 20 seconds, and notice how basically perfectly looked. Not the same day, though. It's not the same day. And we have here, again, a different look. Just so you see a little bit of movement in the water. And in this example is earlier this winter, and it was at 60 seconds again, and I had again a neutral density, or actually I had a polarizer on this one here, and we were able to freeze the motion of the lake. So let's go back to one of the first images we looked at. This is at 1/200th of a second. Again, this is a perfectly exposed image based on the exposure meter as the sun was shining at that point. I changed it to f18 ISO 64, again letting in less light, 60 seconds, and I turned the neutral density filter, the variable neutral density, to let in even less light. And so you'll see that this is at 60 seconds, blurring out the water, basically the same scene, composed slightly different, but basically the same scene. So from what we have here, you could see that there is a difference in how the shutter speed impact an image. In future lessons for shutter speed, I'm going to show you how you can get a nice blurring effect or a motion blur to show the differences of an image, how different things are actually showing motion and movement and action as you slow down the shutter speed. So having a fast shutter speed might not be correct, or having a slow shutter speed might not be correct. Keep this in mind. The image is what you make it based on all three components of the exposure triangle: the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. Thank you for watching today, and check back for more tips and tricks.